Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast. Today, we are going to talk about not just technology, because it's a burning interest of mine, and my dad sent me an email last night about the Great Society from LBJ, and it's quite topical for anybody who is in the engagement farm, formerly known as Twitter, about what happened with JFK and such. So, we're going to talk about LBJ and the Great Society. What was it like to grow up? Because you were born in 1952, and so you would have been in your teens when JFK was. No, you would have been early preteen as JFK was getting assassinated, and then as LBJ took over. So that was happening as a preteen.
Yeah, so let me just give you the timeline. So JFK was assassinated in 1963 when I was 11.
Uh-huh.
I attended his inauguration in 1960, and it was outdoors, and it was bitterly cold. And I remember sitting there as whatever I was, 8-year-old, January, yeah, just turning 8, just like going, what the heck are we doing here? It's like 8 degrees, and we're watching the president go by. And, part of the anecdotes then was he got out of the car, the presidential limo, um, and walked to the Capitol. And although we saw him go by in the car, and we, were in the reviewing stands. So that was January, whatever, of 1960. And then he was assassinated 3 years later in November of 63 in Dallas. And LBJ became president. He was sworn in on the airplane back to DC. And, all of this is vivid memories for everybody. I mean, the idea that your president could get assassinated and was just mind-blowing. Wow, we're the US of A, number one. Number two is like they can't get to us. We've got
Yeah.
Canada and Mexico next to us, and you can't just like kind of sneak into an American city and shoot the president. Although it turned out to be an American who did it, but um, and that's why there's been so much conspiracy theory about it.
Is because
Uh,
it's essentially a nation that is it's almost like a precursor to the information age, because it's a nation sort of with I really want to go longer to
let's go to that later because
yeah,
I know where you're headed. But
yeah,
at the time that happened, when that bullet was fired, we were America, and
yeah.
America was supreme. We had this incredible economic boom from the end of the war onward, and we were feeling our oats. The standard American family with 2.5
Yeah.
kids, or yeah, 2.3 kids was the average, with the white picket fence and the nice suburban home, and the whole concept we had of ourselves was unquestioned.
Yeah.
And through Eisenhower and into Kennedy, but then shit started to happen.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where LBJ comes in, because Kennedy had made a small commitment to Vietnam. He had some advisors over there and there were some troops, but he wasn't like fighting the war. LBJ is the one that did that, who sent a lot of troops over there and tried to win the war. um, and so the transition between JFK and LBJ was strenuous. I mean, it's like we're sitting here going, what the hell's going on? And the students in the colleges were starting to demonstrate against it and going, we shouldn't
When
be
did that
doing
happen?
this.
When did that start happening?
That started happening under LBJ
So in
uh,
the
in
1964,
64,
1965.
65. Remember, LBJ was finished out JFK's term and then was reelected
Yeah.
and finished that term, but he could have, but did not run again.
Uh,
So that would have been 68. And
why didn't he
68,
run again?
oh God, there's so much written about that. It was like he went deep into it and he basically decided that he didn't want to be president. He did not want to be running the Vietnam War. He did not want to be doing anything
Wow. He
else.
shirked.
Felt
He
like,
shirked. And but everything
no,
I
it's
get
not
from
shirked
yeah.
because
Okay.
he had introduced and passed the Great Society
He got his
legislation
goal done.
in 5 years, right? And he felt like he'd done his job. But I
Hmm.
mean, there's how do you know why
Yeah.
somebody does something? But we have columns about, from
Yeah.
my dad uh, about that whole thing, right? He was writing until he died in 1973. And so so he wrote
Wow.
columns about, the Great Society, about LBJ. He was close to being buddies with LBJ, went down to LBJ's ranch and, hung out with him and uh, Lita, what the hell's her name? Mrs. LBJ.
His wife, yeah.
Linda Baines Johnson, something. No, that's a daughter.
Everything I get from him was that he was a pretty power hungry guy who was willing to do whatever it took to get power. Is that accurate?
No, it's not, but it's true. It's
Yeah.
not accurate, but it's true.
Yeah.
He was the majority leader in Congress before
Uh-huh.
Kennedy made him his vice president.
Uh-huh.
So he
Uh-huh.
was powerful in
Yeah.
the same way that we really haven't seen it since, and the whole party system has shifted. That's why Johnson, as majority leader, has this incredibly difficult job of trying to get the Republicans to pass legislation when they don't agree with each other. And in the past, with the real party system, that's why when I talk about it, I wish we could go back to that.
Mm.
In the smoke-filled rooms, they decided who was in charge, and it wasn't through primaries and direct election. So LBJ was incredibly powerful, and then after he became vice president and president, a fellow named Tip O'Neill took his place.
Mm.
Virtually he wasn't nominated, but he ran the House, and the Democrats controlled the House during that time. In fact, the Republicans were kind of out of power. I mean, Eisenhower was Republican, but they were kind of out of power until Nixon got back in. And then there's backs and forths. But that period of time between 1960 and 1972, those 3 election cycles, was when, as I said, shit happened. It was like,
it's a critical
we're Americans.
Yeah.
But everybody's like disagreeing with what we're doing. And people are beginning to wonder, why the hell are we fighting a war, 7,000 miles away and having our good American people being killed in this war on behalf of people that don't really seem to care.
Yeah. For opaque reasons, because of the cloudy rooms where everybody's making decisions. And
not necessarily. Not necessarily. We had a very consistent and well-supported view that we were the world power, that after Russia fell apart, which was Ronald Reagan made conclusive, but they were already falling apart before Reagan outspent them.
Yeah.
But they were in this world power competition between Russia and the U.S. China was like a backward country and not part of the deal. India was a backward country. So it was these 2 big powers that both had nuclear power, so much of it that they could mutually assure destruction.
And this is the part about Georgetown set where I'm reading right now, because it's a much more highly detailed book than the last one I read about both Joe and my grandfather, that basically that they were the only ones. They were probably like 2 out of 6 people, including George Kennan and a few other people, who were like, the Soviet Union is not our ally. Like in 1946, the Soviet Union is our enemy, and we need to radically change foreign policy. And they were right, but then also they were wrong in other ways.
Well, it's like the pendulum swings, right? Before World War II, we didn't consider ourselves a world power. Europe was the center of power.
Yeah.
And then, Hitler disturbed everything, and really in a major way. So we didn't enter the war until 1944, right? We stood back and said, no, we're not going to do that. You guys fight it over. And when Japan attacked us, boom, and we were in the war. So we were fighting both sides of the war too. And we had the industrial ability to pump out airplanes and ships and munitions and howitzers and all that kind of stuff. And Europe didn't. They were laid waste by Hitler's army. So we just supplied everybody. And we had the power to do that because we had this consumer economy that was based on manufacturing. And during the 50s, it was really during the 50s, we embedded in ourselves, and this is in the Georgetown set, the idea that we ran the world, right? And we had to take care of Russia, which we ultimately did. And by the time we took care of Russia, and this is really the interesting flip point, when the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union crumbled, it took a while, there was nobody else. China was not a big power. And so, and what happened, this is my belief, I don't know that I've ever seen anybody else say this, although I've seen a hint of it, we became the only superpower in the world. And that made everybody else go, what the heck? These guys are telling us what to do. And we were telling everybody what to do. And we were still like running the CIA as a secret agency that could, depose people. That we could run the world. We were the world power. And that got us into the situation where everyone else hated us, right? Which is now the problem we have. And we still haven't really absorbed it. It's like even now, so Trump's out there going, fuck you. You're
Yeah.
not keeping up your part. You're
Yeah.
not equal
We're
to
out.
us. And we're not just going to like pay for this
Yeah.
and cover you. You got to take care of yourselves, which in the broad swath of history is probably true.
But this is really interesting because it's
Be
like,
a different way to do it, but
yeah. Well, so and I want to go back to the LBJ and the Great Society and how it was a domestic thing. We're talking about foreign policy, and I think both
yep,
our whole family
yep. And
lineage loves, yeah,
along with it, LBJ had this great vision, a great society, the kind of society that would take care of its people. It would be inclusive and all of the things that got passed. I can't remember the names of the acts, but
yeah.
no discrimination, unsegregated schools, all of the things that he did, and he painted the picture. We all thought, wow, this is great. We can afford to do this. We're the
Let me give
great
you the
society.
timeline. I've got a timeline here. So November 22nd, 1963 takes over from the assassination.
Yeah,
In the State of the Union on January 8th, 1964, declares unconditional war on poverty. By the Economic Opportunity Act was introduced. Johnson's Great Society speech at the University of Michigan. Then in 1964, the Economic Opportunity Act signed, creating Job Corps, VISTA, Volunteers in Service to America, federal work study programs, community action programs. Then the peak legislative period in 1965, in April 11th, the Elementary and Secondary Act Education signed. That's an important one. Federal government going into education.
yep.
Medicare and Medicaid established through amendments to Social Security. That's interesting because Social Security was an FDR program, and then Medicaid and Medicare, I don't even know what they do. Then 1965, the Voting Rights Act signed following Bloody Sunday in Selma. Then the Housing and Urban Development Act created. National Foundation on the Arts and Humanities. 1965 Immigration and Nationality Act eliminates national origin quota. That's important for right now. And then continued momentum. 1966 Model Cities Program. Department of Transportation created. Democrats lose 47 House seats in midterm, weakening Johnson's position. And then, yeah, a bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, it really is cultural.
Just think of it.
Yeah.
Between 1963 and 1968, 5 years.
Yeah.
All that stuff happened. And all because LBJ was such a master politician and controlled both houses of the Congress. When the Democrats pushed it through. And everybody was like into it, right? The average American, the middle class, even
the only people were the conservatives.
Everybody was into it. It was like we were Americans and we could do this.
Except for McCarthy. Except for the McCarthy.
Oh, no, McCarthy is way before. No, McCarthy.
But there has to be a train of that conservative thought that was against it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you talk about Nixon. Nixon got elected in 68. People worried it was going too far, but he kept it going. Right? He fought the war. He ended it. But he kept spending money on Vietnam, and he kept doing the programs. Right? He didn't counter it. Ronald Reagan was the first one that stood up and said, we've gone too far, and all that did was slow it down. It was like Reagan didn't actually fundamentally change anything. He just changed the attitudes toward things. So now we find ourselves in a place where the Democrats have like spent all this money, put us in the hole, right? Okay, and Biden did it even more.
Yeah.
Right. He went out and did the infrastructure bill and the IRA and these huge bills that called for spending trillions of dollars. It's like so now people are feeling like, okay, we're not the superpower anymore.
Yeah.
We still got all those weapons and stuff, but we don't even agree with each other. And now the rest of the world's going, holy crap.
Okay, this is fine because I didn't think we would be able to get back to the point of the show, which is technology, but there is actually a direct relationship.
Oh, it's all part of it, right? Yeah. Even the television technology, even before computers, right? JFK was called the first television president.
Yeah,
because he debated Nixon remember Nixon was the opposition in 1960, 59. And he debated it, and there's famous things like the Nixon checkers speech. And the he just, and Nixon like sweat and, was not
Yeah.
articulate the way JFK was. And he was like Camelot. And so that was the first thing where television had more to do with the election than newspapers.
But then today, where it's like AI is going to change a lot of things, and but not only AI, but our media environment, which is, I guess, what we talked about before recording. We also need to start talking about as well. The media environment is all decentralized, so there's no TV, there's no radio that can say, "Okay, everybody,
No
listen to
single
this."
but
Yeah,
the Democrats currently, this is what the Democrats think, generally speaking. I've heard enough. They didn't understand social media, and
yeah,
Trump did.
yeah.
It's like, what the fuck? Bad thinking, Dems. But that's where they are. They're like so surprised by the result that they're. I saw the New York Times did do a good piece. The 8 reasons that everybody says the Dems lost, and you list all 8. You go like, no, that's not the point.
Uh-huh.
That they have been slow to catch on to what's going on, and it's
Because
not
they're
just the media. It's actually what people are thinking and feeling,
yeah,
right? Who are we, and what do we represent as Americans? Then Trump is closer to the truth on that, or to
yeah.
what we think as a
Well,
population, than the Democrats.
but
But he's still only won by 1.5 million votes, so it's
yeah,
like still pretty close.
but it's close to the truth of a sort of like once you recognize that you've lost something, or once you like his whole point is make America great again, right? Which means that America is no longer great. Like he started from that
Yeah,
perspective,
he just started from that premise.
which means
A
that
lot of people
that's
agree
a
with him.
problem because it means that now everybody recognizes that America is no longer the thing it once was. So what happens to America then? Because
Yeah,
that
well, what is it? What are we?
yeah,
And there's an intense soul searching on what's it mean to be an American,
yeah,
um, particularly if you're throwing people out of the country that we already let in illegally.
yeah,
Um, what is an American? So at some level, people are responding to Trump because he's really going back to, well, back when it was JFK,
yeah,
before LBJ got in there and kind of went crazy.
yeah, yeah,
JFK wasn't
yeah.
that liberal
Yeah.
ultimately, right?
Yeah,
So
he
how
was
about,
the
let's
old
go
left.
back
He was
to
the old left, right? It's all about the old versus the new left in the 1960s. That's the main
and
thing.
the old versus the new right.
Yeah, old right. Yeah, well, now we're at the new right versus the old right. No, no, the old right is gone.
Ronald Reagan was the last
Old right.
instance of the old right,
Yeah,
the gentleman conservatives,
yeah.
Barry Goldwater, and all that.
Hmm.
I mean,
But
there's a lot of detail here. Remember, this is where we genetically come from, because
yeah,
your grandfather, my father, was sitting there every week trying to figure out the twists and turns of this. And so I do talk to my siblings about this, like, what would Daddy think of Donald Trump?
yeah.
Uh,
He would hate him. He would totally hate him. He would be
well,
represent.
he
No.
never hated anybody.
Oh,
He never.
interesting.
This is what my father did. Uncle Joe would have been what,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
but um, but no, Daddy never hated anybody. He went and talked to the chief of the Ku Klux Klan.
yeah,
He went around and talked to all the people that were nasty, um, and the people that were good, and he would form his own opinion. That was the thing that he did that everybody loved about my father. And so,
Do you think that
what?
affected him? Do you think that
Huh?
affected him personally to go talk to the people that were evil and the people who were
Oh,
doing
yeah,
really
you can
bad?
read the columns. I mean, he did this and just wrote about it, so you could
Yeah,
see what he thought.
yeah,
Right? He always was out there in public. He didn't. That's one of the reasons he would never say how he voted, even to the family.
yeah.
He didn't want people to know what he actually thought.
Uh,
He wanted people to know, what his intellect told him.
Came to the conclusion of okay, but now we're at this place where the nation state, would you agree that the nation state is not necessarily the form of government which is going to go into the future, that the nation state is going to change significantly?
No, I don't think we have any other way to organize ourselves as human beings right now. You can see it with
Yeah,
the United Nations, with these transnational organizations.
yeah,
They just don't have a big effect because everything that happens inside of a country. So what's a country border mean in, it's that Europe is a really interesting place because it's like there's a line. It
Mhm.
was developed by political means, not because there's some natural thing. Europeans hate the idea that they should be a United States of Europe, and they are not. They don't act like
But
that.
their
So the European
bureaucracy is now. Their bureaucrocy is. They have a
No, they have a layer
national
called the
bureaucracy.
European Union, but it's very thin, and it can't tell any of the member states what to do.
Well,
um,
but wait, but there's a huge amount of money that goes into it related to NATO, and it's coming from the United States. That
yeah, they just
supports
agreed to
this.
spend a lot more money on defense.
Yeah,
A little bit late,
yeah.
because most people think it'll take them 10 or 20 years to
So that
use up.
bureaucracy, while maybe thin right now because the United States was basically underwriting it, is now getting a whole bunch of money thrown into it. So
Yes,
European
from the
Union,
member states. All the member states, generally speaking, are agreeing to up their percentage of GDP to 2%
yeah,
for defense,
which means
which is
it's like
like a quarter of what we do.
they are
We're doing
becoming the United
8%.
States of Europe then.
Yeah, sort of. But it's not very effective because it's
Yeah,
like back when we were formed as a loose republic, a federated set of states, and the states didn't have to do anything. The federal government wasn't until, was it 1989 when we passed the Constitution and Hamilton put all the rules in place, and 1789, excuse me.
because those like 10 years were just total chaos because it was a
Total chaos. The
yeah,
states are going like that guy, they thrown the English out, and then they just said, well, we'll go back to being colonies,
yeah, yeah,
basically.
yeah, yeah. And it didn't work out, and so they needed a stronger centralized government. But that stronger centralized government wasn't actually all that strong. One of my favorite stories is that
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
the
comparatively.
Mormons, the Mormons were the first minority civil rights group to petition the federal government for help after
Oh, yeah.
the Missouri government started to say you can shoot any Mormon on sight. And so
Oh, didn't know that.
yeah, so they were the first minority group, and this relates to the Great Society, because all of a sudden then the government, we talk about all the foreign policy stuff, but the domestic situation was all of a sudden like it turned into a welfare state. The United States turned into a strong, some might say, socialist welfare state.
Yeah. Well, it started with the income tax, which was passed in, find out when was the
Yeah,
income tax imposed in the U.S. I think it was in the 20s.
yeah.
Um, and it was like, you'd send a few bucks to the federal government every year. And, it was like
1913.
on a percentage basis, it was like less than 1% of your
In
income.
1860,
Now it's like, can
1861,
be as high as 50% or more. It has.
1861 was a flat 3% tax on income over $800. And then the 16th
Yeah.
Amendment to the U.S. Constitution on February 3rd, 1913, established the modern federal income tax system.
Yeah, because we had to fight wars and be able to and that started the process. The idea of an income tax was abhorrent in the beginning in the federal government, all through tariffs and other sources. And so the income tax grew and grew much faster as a percentage of income than the economy did. Right. So more and more of and
Yeah.
that happened really starting with FDR, because when the Great Depression happened, there were no social programs, none, right? You lost your job, you lost your house, and you're like, maybe you have a car, or maybe you're hopping on trains to get around, or whatever it is, or you're going to food kitchens, which were supported privately.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, instituted the idea. This is beginning with FDR, because he was elected in 36, I think it was. 3 terms, 36, 40, 44, yeah, fourth terms. And he instituted the Works Progress Administration with the idea that the government would pay people to do public projects. Like,
Mm.
and it went far enough that there was like art that people made, frescoes, but they also did, building roads and stuff like that. Um, and then during the war, he instituted Social Security. And Social Security originally was like, it's just like the income tax. Like, you pay a couple bucks and, we'll collect the money and give it to old people. Excuse me. It's a complete aberration of the insurance theory. if there's an insurance or a pension fund, there's this issue of the fund being funded, right? That there's enough
Yeah, unfunded
income
liabilities
from
versus
the
funded
assets
liabilities.
that you use the income to pay pensioners. And private pension plans also went nuts, particularly with the UAW. I
Uh,
mean, all this stuff happened all together. It's like you can't, as a country, you asked about nation states, but if countries can organize themselves, you cannot predict the future, right? You can't get everybody to agree,
mm, mm,
except in a centrally managed
China.
right? I have a firm belief that Xi Jinping was brilliant 20 years ago. Now he's just trying to protect everything that he has.
Uh,
And that's not the right thing for China to be doing.
Okay, really interesting territory. There's a question. I mean, there's one thing I want to talk about, but I'm going to let go, which is, and then go to the defense and military in the age of AI. We're spending huge amounts of money on our military, and it seems like most of that military is now antiquated. And you've been in the defense sector since
This is
20.
great because we talked about this in our partners meeting on
Yeah,
Monday,
yeah,
last
yeah,
Monday.
yeah.
I asked Gilman, for everybody listening, is my partner at Allsat Louis, who is deeply embedded and knows everything that's going on in the U.S. government, particularly related to defense. I asked him, so there's this new defense industrial complex that's based on new technologies and new companies. And the federal government actually recognizes that they need to change the way they run the military and supply the military. Um, and so when will it cross? This is the Gilman question. When will it cross over where we're spending more money on new stuff with new companies and less on the legacy stuff? And the underlying thing is we build nuclear aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, kind of cost a couple of bill each. And then you have all the related stuff around it. And the airplanes we're doing, the F-47 is the one that Trump just talked about,
Yeah.
which is going to cost us multiple billions to develop before it even flies. That part of the legacy system that we have, independent of how effective it is, accounts for 58% of our
Oh, interesting.
defense spending.
So we
There's a
do spend a
component of just
lot.
operating the military, paying soldiers and stuff like that.
Okay, okay.
And but there's a growing part, and Trump is pushing this really hard. Heck, Seth, all these people, I mean, it's like they're actually doing the right thing, independent of all the social stuff. Um, and they're pushing more into new stuff like Anduril and Palantir and a bunch of other companies, some of which
Mhm.
we're invested in. And so he said it will be probably 1932, I mean, excuse me, 2032 uh, when it starts to be equal.
Mm,
And
mm,
and the legacy primes, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, all of these companies that have been operating on cost plus contracts with the U.S. government know that, and
mm.
they don't know what to do about it.
Except hire
So
other
far,
people.
well, they buy companies,
Yeah,
right? Lockheed
yeah.
Martin just bought a company. Can't remember which one it was, and but they're not integrating it into the behemoth Lockheed Martin. And they're
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah.
they are themselves trying to switch the business that they're in and get used to a different business model. But
Which
you
we've
have like
talked about.
100,000 employees. How do you get everybody to change their
Yeah,
minds?
yeah. The culture, and we've talked about this with IBM, and we've talked. We need new defense companies, right? New
Or
defense
even
companies that
Apple,
won't
or
be required.
once you get to a certain size, it's a battleship. It's very hard to turn.
And but does that mean that we'll have new defense companies that won't be acquired?
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Android, they're
yeah.
not going to be acquired. Nobody can pay them enough money. They're already raising so much money and building it out. Palantir is worth
I'll check.
trying to remember. I think their peak value was like 250 billion,
Uh-huh.
which is uh, way beyond what their revenue would
Uh,
suggest. But uh, and they are public, so but most of the companies are private right now, so you don't really have a benchmark to go against. And in the middle of all this, of course, the AI companies have been raising billions of dollars as well, and that's bigger in terms of the overall investment and expectation because that will affect the defense business and everything else too. So. Um,
they were at a Palantir was at 146 billion on November 17th, 2024.
Yeah, it went way up though, just in the interim. I actually have it on my phone. So
When did you first get started in defense?
yes.
What was it only because of Gilman?
uh, Primarily because Gilman Palantir. Its current market cap is 213 billion. Um, and it went above that. And then it's recovered quite well, actually. Um, the So Gilman is, well, that's a whole nother thing. We should get Gilman on
Yes, yeah, I agree.
the
Yeah.
we should,
I would
because
love
this
to.
goes way back, and
Yeah,
people have asked us, so when did you first meet Gilman? And I'm going, I remember the first time I met him
yeah.
very clearly. Uh, but before I met him, I knew about him and he knew about me. Um, so the first time we became aware of each other was like 2 years before we actually met.
Uh,
And then there's a whole story. We can tell that story.
what
So
was
let's
the
do
first? Yeah, we should. We should. But what was the first investment you guys made together?
at Allsop Louis. We
Mm-hmm.
formed the fund in 2006. And I have to be absolutely sure of this to do it, but
I'm gonna check Perplexity knows.
no, it's actually not in perplexity. There's a little bit of hallucination in the notes.
Yeah.
The But we haven't talked about this before. So the very first deal that we did is we moved into an office next to Blue Jean Company,
Levi. Levi's.
Levi's,
Yeah.
Levi Plaza. Our first office was there, and we'd moved in, and I can't remember how we connected with him, but this Russian guy came in. Like I think it was from someone else to Gilman, but this Russian guy came in, and I ended up going to Moscow in January of
Hmm.
2007 to
Hmm.
do diligence on this deal. But the guy came in and said, "Well, I have to declare bankruptcy because we're out of money and we're a mess." And so Gilman asked him the question, "How much money do you need to go for 4 months?" And he went, $17,000. We wrote him a check on the spot. Patty Wong wrote a handwritten check out for $17,000 to keep him alive while I could figure out whether there was anything here. God, trying to remember the name of that company. Because it changed names after that, and then it merged with another company. And it was part of a sale of a company that we didn't really make money on the deal, but we got some back. That was the very first deal. And that was like, that's us. We're flexible. We can figure out how to deal with this. We don't have to play by the rules. And although we do play by the rules, we always play by the rules in terms of our investors. But
Yeah, it's different set of rules because there's the rules of a corporation that are ridiculous, and then there's the rules of the startup, which are
and in a venture capital firm, there's the rules that apply to your investors and the rules that apply to who you invest in. And the rules that apply to
oh,
who you invest in are totally fungible, right? That's why Andreessen Horowitz could reinvent the venture business when Andreessen and Horowitz got together. They changed how venture capital worked.
got it. Okay. Um, so maybe we should save the Gilman Louis
Yeah,
investigation for
yeah,
a
we should.
later one. And that kind of I want to go into that because we need to do that for the book as well, about like what happened from 2003 2001 somewhere around there until later. But let's go back to the philosophical defense, where defense goes, because it's like the current spending of the United States government on legacy systems feels like a complete waste of money, and it's a waste of money in the trillions of dollars.
It's a waste. It's very inefficient,
Yeah.
but it is still the reason that we are the world's greatest superpower. Right? Russia doesn't have the economy to support this. They're fighting in the Ukraine, but they can't project a presence. And China's coming up. Right? They're not there yet. Just the aircraft carriers. I can't remember if I said this before, but as a partnership, we from Gilman, we had the opportunity to spend a night on an aircraft carrier off of San Diego, and flew out to the aircraft carrier, hung out for a night. Didn't really sleep very much because it's really noisy in an aircraft carrier, particularly when the airplanes are landing and taking off. Um, And but it was like just the coolest thing in the world. Um, the briefing was the United States has the economic power to field across the world
Yeah.
uh, aircraft carriers that cover all three, how many oceans? All the oceans. So, in fact, and still today, we have 10 aircraft carriers that are located around the world
Yeah.
and operate as a unit, an economic unit, right? We send the money, they buy the food,
Yeah.
all the things that happen. They can supply all the planes, they have nuclear tipped missiles, blah, blah. We went and looked at those. They're held down at the bottom of the aircraft carrier. Um, they're like little cities and they're self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And they rotate one out every year or so.
Uh,
So they actually have 11 aircraft carriers. One's always in dock being
yeah.
retrofitted.
Yeah.
And and they've replaced them over time. So now we have all nuclear aircraft carriers. The last one was the Eisenhower or something like that. They're all named after presidents. And uh, so we are now fielding that many. And that's just the aircraft carriers. Each aircraft carrier has a like flotilla of
Compliment. Yeah.
ships that go with it. And we also have under the water nuclear submarines that are in every ocean, wandering around and can't be detected by the enemy. And we don't know about China yet, but and they have submarines and they have aircraft carriers, but they haven't built up the systems
But
to project that kind of presence.
there
So
could
we
be
are still there, right?
yeah.
That's crucial. And that is trillions of dollars right
But
there.
all of that could be wiped out by a next generation weapon, which the United States has, like the direct energy weapons. We have direct energy weapons, and I believe we have weapons that can take
I'm
out.
not going to argue the details. I don't know that. You can take
Yeah.
that up with Goodwin when we get him on.
Yeah.
But because there's space-based weapons, for God's
Yes.
sake.
Yeah. Yeah.
Russia's got
Yeah.
nuclear
Yeah.
satellites up
Yeah.
there. There's a lot of stuff happening on
This
the
is
leading edge.
yeah.
He knows, but I don't.
But this is the point that I have, which is that all of that's interesting and all of that's going to remain important. But starting from what I want to say is there is real physical warfare, but most of the battlefield no longer is in the real physical warfare. Now it is information warfare.
Oh, God. I mean, the war in Ukraine and the war in Gaza are being fought on the ground and people are dying.
But those are
That's war as it is right now.
but those
There's a
are
theory
proxy
of
wars.
war. There's
But
a
those are
theory of
proxy
war.
wars. Yeah, those are proxy wars. They aren't wars like the war that we used to have. I don't think
But
those
we're in the
wars
middle of a transition, so you can't tell where it's going to end up.
yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
Everybody argues about it, but we
No, I
don't know
agree.
what.
I agree that we don't know. But I do think that it's true that a huge amount of warfare is taking place in the battlefield of people's minds.
Oh yeah, but that's not generally considered war. That's
But it's
disinformation or
it is considered war because that's the whole OSS, the OSS
Cold War.
yeah, the Cold War.
Well,
That was an
Cold
information
War as
huge
opposed to
amount.
hot wars. Hot wars are
Yeah.
still fought on the ground.
But but then imagine that mutually assured destruction continues to play out as a blanket against total war, and that we only have proxy wars and information war. Like that is a potential scenario that could happen, basically.
You're going to talk yourself into being recruited into the Trump administration as an advisor.
I'm
This
down here in
this
Argentina.
is right on the edge of fundamental thought, right? That
Uh,
how do you fight wars when the technology, all the information systems, all the mechanical systems, drones, and all that kind of stuff have changed, right? When's the tipping point? When
Yeah.
does it no longer matter to have a proxy war?
Mm.
Who knows?
Mm.
It's like, who knows? We don't know.
Yeah.
Hopefully I won't be here for that.
But
You know?
and this is uncertainty, and this is really interesting given our show because in your world you've been dealing with uncertainty and technological advancement since the 1980s.
My whole life, basically.
Yeah, and now we're in that world where the whole world is operating under that. Whereas when you were born, it was it was relatively fixed in terms of what would happen next year, right? Like in terms of the change to people's psychologies.
Right. You're talking about change psychology, and before airplanes, trains, and automobiles, change would be generational, maybe even multi-generational. You go through your your father and
Yeah.
you and your
No
kids
change.
all live the same life. And then the cycle of change has gotten compressed by technology. It's a broader term of
Yeah.
technology, to the point where we're having change happen within a generation.
Mhm.
And so I've experienced, you know, given that I'm a boomer,
Mm.
right? I've experienced the level of change that happened to boomers, that happened to millennials, that happened to,
Yeah.
I can't even
Zoomers.
remember what the categories are, but, you
Yeah.
know, my kids' kids.
Yeah.
And I've seen that change happen. And one of the reasons that I think I'm special is that even at the age of 73, I can still like deal with, I'm having a really hard time with AI. It's just happening so fast. I can't keep up with it.
I am too.
Um, yeah, but I didn't have that problem with social media. I
Yeah.
didn't have that problem with the mobile phone. I didn't have that problem. It's like
Yeah.
working my way back. I was able to keep up, but right now I'm feeling like I just can't keep up
So,
with it.
but I don't
I'll
think that's an
do
age
that.
problem. I mean, definitely age plays a factor in it, but like for me, like it's impossible. I think for people within the industry, even people within Anthropic, yeah, they
Well,
get
I've
an
used you as
idea.
an example, right? You did video games when you were growing up, at a time when video games were like people kind of like the leading edge. Like
Yeah.
people are going like, "What are we training our kids to do? To kill each other?" And there
Uh-huh.
was
Uh-huh.
congressional hearings on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew at the time that what video games were teaching you to do was
Yeah.
to twitch, to process information, multiple streams of information in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what video games are basically. Be able to figure out what to do in real time, given that you don't have all the information.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
so I believe that, and I believe that true. And so your generation that grew up with video games can process information differently than my generation can. I can't do it. I don't play video games, and I'm actually a little scared of it. Because then I'd be spending like 80% of my time learning how to play a video game and not doing my job.
Yeah, wait. The great question for our book. Did you ever get into it? Like, because you invested in a lot of infrastructure
Mhm.
game companies, but you never played them.
Yeah, but I'm representing now what I could understand, right? Which I could understand video games. I knew
Yeah.
this was a
Yeah.
fundamental premise in my newsletter, but
Yeah.
this is all the way back when I got into the business. I observed that video games always solve the technical problems first
Yeah. Yeah.
because you couldn't
Yeah.
document them. People wouldn't read documentation. They had to be easy to use and understand, and yet they had to be responsive to human interaction. And it wouldn't help. There are some games that aren't like first person shooters or
Yeah.
the real time stuff, but so I could see where there were changes in how the video game business worked that absorbed new technologies before other domains, right? And
Yeah.
so it's still true basically today that video games represent the leading edge. I mean, if there's anywhere that AI is being applied most readily, it's in the development and of new video games.
That's an
Still,
interesting insight. I've never heard that before. That it's always the video games that are most technically where the technology advances, and it's purely because somebody wanting to play a game doesn't want to go read a guidebook.
yeah, and the computer has to be responsive, right? The way that graphics are painted on the screen has to happen fast,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
way that the central processing unit happens and how it works with memory has to be really fast. And I mean, it goes way down. That original video game developers hard coded, did machine level coding in order to make them fast. Right now, we have things like the Unreal Engine and things that in
Yeah.
a current architecture can make the thing go fast, and you don't have to do that low level coding anymore. But
But
you
you never
still have
invested in games. You only invested in game infrastructure companies for that reason.
never invested games. Now, the irony of Niantic is
It is a game.
that it's a game. We invested in the company because it was Pokemon Go and spinning out of Google. Um, we didn't anticipate that it was AR at the time.
Yeah.
And although that was the fun where we were investing in virtual and alternate reality technology.
Uh,
So we also have DigiLens and Hover and other companies that are participating in that.
and now that whole thing is coming to fruition, sort of.
Sort
AR.
of, sort
Yeah.
of is like, okay, we can kind of see how long it'll take. I think I've pulled these out before. They're not charged, but
Yeah.
you know, these are AR glasses.
Yeah.
And
Do
they
you
happen to
use
have
them?
glass on them, but and this is a really, really first sort of point
Yeah,
0.5
yeah,
generation
yeah.
AR. And because everybody knows we know about this, we get a lot of people pitching us. So I'm still pretty current on what's going on with the AR glasses. Right now, the touch point is Snap Spectacles, but everybody's anticipating what Meta's going to do with the Orion glasses. So I'm right there. I know exactly what's going on in that domain.
I have a random question for the last question. What is when so you don't do cold calls much? I'm sure you've accepted some cold calls from founders who are looking to invest. You have when you say a bunch of people know, does that mean that they somehow found a mutual connection and then get an introduction from the mutual connection? And then how do you determine whether to meet
So
them?
you're talking deal flow and how the venture capital business works.
Yeah.
They, it's funny because I have a parallel with what I used to do as a journalist. In journalism, you have a beat, and part of what happens when you're assigned a beat is you have to figure out who the hell knows what's going on, and you have to go talk to them. And then once you talk to enough of them, they sort of mutually recognize that you're the beat reporter. So they
Hmm.
start feeding you stuff, and better reporters get fed the best stuff, right? They know how to tell who really knows what they're talking about and develops relationships with them. It's the same thing in venture capital.
Yeah, interesting.
Now, people know I'm generally a venture capitalist, so I get a lot of pitches that have nothing to do with what we're talking about,
Yeah,
which I never respond to.
yeah.
But every once in a while, I get a cold email. Like I got one recently for an app called Waltz, WAL. Can't remember if there's a T, Z. And it's interesting. It's not something I'd ever invest in because it's kind of at the application level. Um, but it's kind of it tickled my fancy because I've been thinking about how you do this. It's basically guided tours in locations narrated by celebrities.
Hmm.
And this guy got to Jimmy Kimmel, who's on Hollywood Boulevard. His theater is on Hollywood Boulevard. Um, and so Jimmy Kimmel has done the test app, the demo app. And it's a tour around Hollywood Boulevard that includes his favorite In-N-Out burger. So it's all what Jimmy
But
Kimmel loves
but it's
about
on your
all.
phone.
Yeah, it's an app on your phone. So you
Yeah.
go there, and your phone will keep track of where you are because of GPS, and it will take you and then narrate, Grauman's Chinese Theater,
Is it
whatever
AI
the
generated or is it his actual voice?
it's him. He
Okay.
participated
Yeah,
in it,
yeah, yeah.
right? And that's the whole theory is that they go to a celebrity who lives somewhere, like Robert De Niro in Lower Manhattan or whoever it is. They're doing LA and New York first. Of course, it has to be rolled out city by city, but that's really cool. I said so. I was just in Buenos Aires. I mean, do you know anybody in Buenos Aires that everybody knows about?
Uh,
The celebrity in Buenos Aires. Um, Maybe it's you. I don't
Not yet. Uh,
know. Yeah.
yeah. What was the cold call? How did he cold call you?
He sent an email. And
Okay.
what he did was he had done his research. Like this, I
Uh,
give him total credit.
yeah.
I had to be careful about this because now I'll probably start getting a lot of emails from people. Um, he went and found a lecture, I call it
Hmm.
loosely, that I did at UCLA. Uh, and I'll send you the link. You can
Yeah.
look at.
I found it. You sent me that one before, I think.
I did send you that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah. Mhm.
I actually ended up watching it again because I'd forgotten that I'd done this. So I watched it. And it's like 45 minutes long, and I pitched our fund at that time. I think it was the third fund, um, and I ran the pitch for the students because I figured none of them are going to like tell anybody else, and I could do this, and I wouldn't break any rules. And I had a lot of fun doing it. You could tell I had fun doing it, and they had fun. Although this is really a problem with colleges. Students don't ask very many questions,
Yes. Yeah.
even though they're supposed to learn.
Yeah.
The so, but it was a lot of fun, and so I went, well, fuck this guy. Went and found this, watched it, sent me an email, and said, I see how you work, and I wonder if you're. I got, well, he did the work, so I responded and had a session with him.
Hmm.
I like him. I think he'll be successful. It's going to be a tough road to hoe to build out all those tour guides, but maybe he can automate it. In fact, maybe AI will play a role in that, but the value of it is based on having the celebrity actually do it.
Okay. Really interesting. Well, thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.
Yeah.